For all those who appreciate the work that we're doing here on Standing for Truth, please hit that subscribe button because we are just getting started.
Okay, looks like we are live tonight on Standing for Truth. We got a very special guest with us tonight, Brother Salvador Cordova. I know he's one of the fan favorites here, so we've got definitely a must-watch lecture, Fisher's Theorem, and the worthless definition of evolutionary fitness. So I know I'm really, really excited for this, and I know everybody else is as well. So, Sal, thank you so much for giving us your time. I know it's been a little bit since we've had you on. Therefore, if you had anything to say, any introductory words, the floor is yours. Once again, thanks so much, Sal.
Well, thank you for having me. I've been busy. There are about 4 peer-reviewed papers, 4 or 5 papers in the works. It doesn't mean we're going to get published. We're certainly going to try to get into the secular venues. There is 1 paper we've submitted 7 times and gotten 7 rejections. So that's kind of a funny story in and of itself. We had an editor. We would get messages from the editor saying that your conclusions are correct, but we're not going to publish, and they'll give their kind of flimsy reasons for it. And then we'd ask the editor, some of them we'd say, well, can we at least get your rejection letter and publish it publicly? That'd be very valuable. Then you're at least saying, well, your paper fails, but your conclusions are correct. Of course,
right,
they'll never get back to us on that. Because, all right, so it turns out, thankfully, I don't know how, this was a God thing. One of the papers, I finally got frustrated, and I contacted Joshua Swamidath on Peaceful Science, and I said, because they're saying, why don't you all get published? I said, because there's prejudice, and they said that's not true. And I said, okay, look at this paper. He got the editor-in-chief of Cell Reports, to look at it, and just as a side note, some time ago. Professor Stern Cardinale actually was very critical of my argument, and someone more senior than him actually said Sal's correct.
Wow, really?
And I had the link to that. Oh my goodness!
Well,
so
that's awesome.
If you guys want to follow this, the saga
yeah, I'd love to see that. It just goes to show you how, I guess, closed-minded some of the critics are. When you were saying somebody above him looked at the paper and said, no, this is correct, what I'm looking at here. Okay,
so what I want to say is maybe it was a junk paper. Okay, I'm not going to say that necessarily our paper was good or bad. I thought it was okay enough. It had, I thought the critics were pointing out some things that I could have done different, and I actually want to thank them for their free of charge peer review.
Yeah. Nothing wrong with a free peer review. We got nothing against that.
The name of the editor-in-chief is Steve Matheson. And I'm looking at it right here, and I want to provide this for the readers because people have been asking me, well, what sort of peer review do you try? And I'll show you one. I'll provide also a link to the readers of an article I wrote, co-authored with Joe DeWeese, that was published April 1st, 2019. That's kind of unfortunate that it was April 1st because it wasn't an April Fool's joke.
Yeah, exactly.
So let me see here's the link. All right, so I'm just going to read this and I'm going to provide the link. I'm going to ask a favor of you,
of course.
SFT. I'm going to put it in the private chat, the link.
Sure, and I can put it in the comment section.
Thank you. I appreciate that. So anyway, this is what Steve, we were criticizing Ono's theory of nylon eating bacteria, and he said, my understanding is Ono was wrong. Okay, the important reason for that is, let me share my screen here.
Yeah, let me get that approved for you.
And then we'll go to Fisher's theorem, but while we're waiting for people.
Of course, yeah, I think this is a good idea. Like I said, we've missed you, Sal. I know a lot is happened. It's been eventful for you. Therefore, we definitely want to get some updates from you. So I can definitely share screen.
Okay, I'm gonna bring this up, and I'm gonna show a related article, and I'm gonna put this in the private chat also. Thank you.
I can post that.
So let me tell you what this was all about, and I'm just gonna share my screen here. In 1985, they were coming out and just blasting creationists and saying, we have evidence that new proteins can evolve without God's help. Brand new proteins can evolve without God's help. And they were just bashing creationists and saying all your probability calculations are all faulty. And by the way, we just had this new mutation that evolved after 1935. And that's proof you guys are just totally wrong. Okay, this is the article, okay? It was based on work by a paper by Susumu Ono, 1984, called Birth of a Unique Enzyme. And Ono said that this new enzyme evolved right after 1935, after the invention of nylon, and it helps bacteria digest nylon.
I guess in a nutshell, because it is extremely interesting, and we hear that the nylon digestion, we oftentimes hear that as being, your number one example of a change that was beneficial and novel. Can you give us a brief rundown of your conclusions in that paper, Sal, if you don't mind?
Oh, yeah. I'll give you the conclusion. Maybe the nasty way to say it, it evolved in, it was basically a unintentional hoax.
Unintentional hoax. I like it.
Yeah, meaning the guy who wrote it was sincere, but what ended up happening is 5 years after it was evident that it was false, they never retracted it. They never made a formal, public, really vehement retraction. It was kind of the evidence against it was stated in just very muted terms that only a technician would really, a specialist would understand. So by 1992, it was pretty obvious this thing was just totally bogus. But there are papers that still cite it to this day that are scientific.
That's amazing.
Literature.
And Sal, you're saying that they recognized, and you're saying they recognized the error.
Oh yeah.
And there was no retraction.
Right. So if someone wants to check me on this, that's why I provided the link to this Peaceful Science, because Joshua Swamidas actually was. He's on the other side of the issue, but he actually showed a lot of integrity to let me state my case. And he got the editor of Cell Reports to look at it. And he said, yeah, your paper has problems, but the conclusion's correct. He didn't say your conclusion's correct. What he said, okay, I'm going to quote him. He said, Ono was wrong. Okay. He didn't say Salvador. He can't bring himself to say Salvador Cordova and John Sanford were correct. He wouldn't say
that. Yeah.
He would say, Ono was wrong. Okay, but your paper sucks. But I was like, well, thank you. That's the best news I ever heard.
Thank you for the compliments. Essentially, they were saying Dr. Sanford and Salvador Cordova were right, but they were just not right out saying it because that's too funny.
Right. They're not going to say you wrote a great paper. It's basically your paper sucked, which I thought was, well, I'm actually happy for you to say Ono was wrong, because you could say our paper sucks, but just tell the truth. And that's what they did. And you could see that an evolutionary biologist came out and said, yeah, Ono was wrong. And it was really funny. If you follow the thread, you could see all the biologists saying, they said, Sal, your paper sucks. And I said, well, okay, I'll accept that. But were our conclusions right? And they'll just say, no, your paper sucks. I'm just like, well, that's not the point of this.
I think they might have missed the point, Sal.
You know what I'd say? I'd say, thank you very much. Thank you for the constructive feedback. But can you tell me, it's kind of helpful to tell me if the conclusion was right or wrong, because that's what really matters, right?
And it just so turns out the conclusion was right. So
yeah, so that was a pretty funny thread. And Dr. Dan was getting on my case, and his whole Reddit sub was just ripping into me, saying, I'm stupid or this or that. So that was finally vindication. So that's an example of a rejection here. And the funny thing is, we have put this on what they call a preprint server that's available through the chemical archive, and you could actually read it. And the funny thing is, this is one of the most downloaded. Influential papers that never got published.
That's an amazing way to put it. One of the most downloaded influential papers that was never published.
Well,
the conclusion doesn't lie, Sal.
Yeah, I see Luca Medugno is here. He had actually referenced the nylonase story before, and I told him that I'd shown that it's wrong. And he's always very polite. So greetings, Luca. And so I'm just providing some documentation of the saga of that. And it's just really funny.
Well, that's too good for people to not look into and read for themselves. So Sal, when we're done here, I'm going to post both links in the description box, because I think there's a lot of people that are going to want to do that.
So I don't know how many of you know, like the BioLogos Foundation, Francis Collins.
Oh yeah,
Dennis Venema had published a big book, and he said my favorite proof of evolution is nylonase. That was in 2016. And then Ken Miller, who was in the Dover versus Kitzmiller trial, outside of the trial, he wrote a book. He said this is the most powerful evidence of evolution. He didn't use that. No, that's what Venema said, but he used the nylonase example as one of his best examples of evolution, and supposedly how the creationists are wrong. So what was really funny about all this is there's been a whole cottage industry that referenced this, lots of books published, and I even saw in passing a theology book that said this is proof that, this is evidence that there's no God, there's no need of it. And there you have it with the National Center for Science Education, the NCSE. They were saying new proteins without God's help. So they've been just using this, and it's been, like I said, an unintentional hoax. But it's still kind of bad now because people still cite it as truth.
They do.
And so...
well, I'd be curious to know, because I know Dr. Dennis Venema, I believe it was in his book, Adam in the Genome. I'm not 100% sure. Yeah. And he claimed the nylon digestion was, the best so-called evidence for evolution. I'd be curious to know, has he admitted the errors?
Oh yeah, he finally did. He did after both the Discovery Institute and our unpublished paper. He finally had to back down. It was it's just so brutally obvious at this point. And this was in 2017 we started releasing these papers. It's still in 2019. There was this paper published May 23rd, 2019 that said de novo gene birth, and it cites this nylonase thing. And I said, yeah, I could see why they don't want to admit error, because this makes the whole field look kind of stupid.
Well, because it's been cited so many times and for so long. And from my understanding, they've really only got a few select examples that they can point to as truly novel, beneficial type changes. Therefore, for them to admit that this nylon digestion is not what it's been claimed to be, well, now they're just one more down.
Oh, so you asked what the evidence was? It's very simple. The breakthrough came 6 weeks into our research. I found a 1956 paper, totally forgotten, obscure. It was pretty difficult to nail it down. They did an experiment on mammalian trypsin. Trypsin is an enzyme that mammals have. Humans have trypsin, pigs have trypsin, etc. It could degrade nylon. I pointed that out to Dr. Dan, and he was saying, well, what proof do you have? How do you know it didn't change? I'm just like, Dan, it didn't change. Humans are still humans, like from when they're 1935. And if it's in a pig and if it's a human, it probably it didn't have a coordinated change across all mammals just because nylon got invented. So humans have an enzyme that can break nylon. We found out that lots of bacteria have enzymes that could break nylon. And just to use some technical terms, they had the homologous NylB protein. It was homologous but sufficiently divergent that it had to be an ancient protein. It pre-existed 1935. And that's basically why everyone
That is awesome.
You'll see that in the thread. They just realize it's just, this is a totally sinking ship to try to defend this. So Dennis Venema retracted.
He retracted too, eh?
Oh yeah, it's somewhere there that he made the retraction. I haven't pinned it down, but someone found the retraction in just like an obscure blog. So,
well, here's the thing. You've got proponents of evolution reading Dr. Dennis Venema's book, Adam and the Genome, seeing that example of the nylon digestion being used, and they're still using it to this day, not knowing that Dennis Venema has retracted it. That is some interesting stuff. Okay, so in a nutshell, you're saying humans and bacteria have these enzymes to break down nylon, and so the ability was already in the organism.
Right. Some people were saying, well, Sal, you don't know what you're talking about. I've even had postdocs say that, well, it can't break down something until after it's in existence. And I said, well, this is like saying a rock doesn't have the inherent capacity to break a car window until cars are invented. It's like, no.
A rock has always had that ability, and that's a really good analogy. That's a good way to put it. Right. So has there been any serious response, and I'm not talking just a blog post or a comment, like an actual serious response or rebuttal to the conclusions of that paper, Sal? Or it sounds like it's still pretty rock solid.
No serious response. I mean, I think the best response is that your writing style sucks and this was just a hit piece and you're using the wrong search engine. And so what I did is I said, well, thank you very much for the constructive feedback. And I actually did. I have an unpublished new version of that's even stronger. So I figured we'd use our critics to good use. Well, they're kind of mean. And I said, you know what? We could just look at this in a different way rather than getting angry. I said, well, you put them to good use. And I realized, oh, my goodness, I have a huge editorial team working for me now.
Well, you've done some phenomenal work, Sal. That's why we love you on this channel. That's awesome. I mean, thank God for doing Dr. Stanford.
So, greetings to everybody who said who's tuning in. And so we were just chatting a little bit about some of my peer-reviewed work. I'm going to give another link to some of those are peer-reviewed rejections. I'll give you one that actually got accepted. So you're going to like this. This is in a secular
this
venue.
Is awesome.
So this was the one that was April 1st, 2019. And like I said, it's too bad it had to be exactly on that date. Because
you guys, it's not an April Fool's joke.
Right. So it's not an April Fool's joke, even though Two Creationists got in secular peer review. So I'm providing the link to it. It's the FASED journal. It's this journal of the Federation of the American Societies of Experimental Biology.
Okay.
And so you'll see me in a list of like a bazillion co-authors, and my name is buried down there toward the bottom of the list.
But it's in there nonetheless.
Yeah, but the number one guy, God bless him, is Joe DeWeese. Maybe sometime we could co-host him here. He said that might be a good idea, but he's swamped right now because he has a huge teaching load. He's an adjunct professor at Vanderbilt School of Medicine and also a associate professor at Lipscomb University. He's a really bright guy. So
he's awesome. He's a blessing. I recently watched a lecture from him on the Is Genesis History YouTube channel. So it sounds like he's swamped right now, which is understandable. But one of these days in the future, we'd love to host him. It'd be an honor.
So people are asking about peer review. Now we have another peer reviewed article that came out. So we have the articles that are in secular world. We have articles that are in the creationist world, but they will read like a secular article because it's all sciencey. So here's one from Kevin Anderson's outfit from Creation Research Society. So now I'm going to tell you a little bit of a backstory. The secular version of our article I provided, it parallels the creationist version of the article, which is more accessible. And so maybe after a year, I think they make all of their articles public domain, because right now the CRSQ, the creationist version, is still behind a paywall. But then you can read that, after about a year. So the secular one reads really technical, but the creationist one is more for a more general audience.
Right.
And this leads to the third peer-reviewed article that we're going to talk about tonight, which is Fisher's Theorem, and I'm going to give a link to that. This is a journal that is intelligent design friendly. They're not overtly creationist, nor are they overtly intelligent design. And I'm going to provide a link to that. So this is actually the topic of tonight. So Fisher's Fundamental Theorem. So I provided a link to all these papers. The best one, ironically, was the one that got rejected and never published.
Well, I'm going to be busy tonight reading all these. I'll tell you that much, Sal. I posted them all in the comment section, but I'm also going to take some time and put it into the description box. So people who watch the video later, they can access them easily.
Thank you. So this one's kind of in between. This is kind of in between purely secular and then ID. It's, if you read the paper, you're like, I can't really see that this says anything about intelligent design. It's just a straight up secular type paper. And that's exactly the way I wrote this paper. But a mainstream journal would not accept it, even though anything I said there is not really shouldn't even be controversial. Right. The usual excuse we get is like, oh, that's been known for a long time. Of course, they won't, just like our nylonase thing, we'll get, the editor will say, yeah, this is known for a long time. Sorry, it's not novel enough or exciting enough for our readers. And
it sounds like
to publish it.
Yeah, that sounds like an excuse to me. Because what's funny about the nylon paper, for example, that was not new. And the conclusions of that paper resulted in Venema retracting it, people changing their mind on that so-called example of evolution. So, there's no reason why it shouldn't have been published. So that's,
the funny thing is, some people haven't gotten the menu. The memo. Some people haven't gotten the memo. A PLOS One journal article just came out, and I'm just like, guys, you guys are just as clueless as you were 35 years ago. Sorry, so I just don't have respect for your industry. You can't get your story straight, and you're relying on data that's faulty. And at this point, you could say it's an unwitting hoax, and it's just persisted. And it's just like, how do you expect that the rest of the scientific industry will find you respectable? I can tell you that privately, people who are like chemists and physicists and other scientists, they kind of like evolutionary biologists. All right. So the evolutionary biologists give the right naturalistic story, but in terms of their science, they're not respected. Wow. And evidence of that, the evidence of that is when you look at the top medical research, biotech, pharmaceutical research teams, look how many evolutionary biologists are their key researchers.
Not too many.
Not too many. Not too many. There are a few for sure, but most of them are chemists.
Right.
Lots of them are engineers. Lots of them are physicists and computer scientists. So in the larger proportion, engineers are getting to be a larger and larger proportion of medical biotechnology type research because they have the right skill sets to understand the design of God.
Right. Amen. Amen.
So anyway, thank you. I know we were just kind of beating around the bush, but I was updating people because there's been a lot of questions about what my work is. We do have, as I said, 4 to 5. We have 4 to 5 papers in the works. What helps is that I have lots of co-authors, because when you're a solo publisher, that's really hard. If you have 10 co-authors and you're publishing papers together, you can generate a lot more papers, and you have a good chance of getting a lot through. So that's it. So some people hear that I'm working on 4 or 5 papers that will say that's a lot, and I'll say, in a sense, I'm only working on the equivalent of 1, but it's spread over 5 different projects. These will be, and this is what I encourage people who are aspiring scientists or want to publish or do research. These will be in venues that are in like mathematics, chemistry journals, engineering journals, everything except evolutionary biology journals. You can find a niche if you do good work, like Joe DeWeese trying to find cures for cancer. People will welcome you.
Right.
You're a creationist. It's like we won't count that against you if you can help us cure cancer. And if you think about it, that means a lot, because
it does.
Almost everybody involved in medical research, like say cancer research or any other kind of research, where they may have relatives or they themselves are suffering with these diseases. They take it very, very seriously. That they feel like they're on a mission to do this right, and they're going to just set aside politics and ideology and all that junk, and say, we're just going to hire the best people, and we're going to just try to work together to solve this problem. So there are opportunities. But the great thing is, like, you get people like Joe DeWeese who've been doing cancer research and enzyme research for 15, 17 years, and they're able to build a great scientific reputation, and they're just a great witness. So people are asking me what I'll be publishing on. It won't be some big anti-evolutionary thing like some people have the privilege of doing, like Nathaniel Jeanson. That's a very specialized niche, because that's someone right there on the outpost. That he's like the Delta Force, okay? He's just out there on his own. He's just like a one-man army. Yeah, and that's real. That's really tough to get in that position. I'm my science research is going to be kind of not quite as exciting as Nathaniel's or Brian Thomas there at the Institute of Creation Research. So some people on the other side have been kind of questioning me about what my activities are, because I guess they want to get the story straight on what I really do. And I'll say, I'm just a troublemaker. I'm not some big scientist or anything. And I think I've tried to communicate that I'm very interested in creation science and ID, but to be able to understand the science, sometimes you just have to do some stuff that's not directly related to creation science, but you're learning about the complexity of life. Right. And that's also a way to learn design, because then you get to then talk about it and see how could this evolve once you have mastery of some of the aspects. So anyway, let me share my screen.
Of course.
Now that we've gotten there, I have a video I wish to share with people.
Hey, Sal, we could listen to you talk all day. We've missed you, and a lengthy introduction is fine with us. We've all been interested to hear what you've been doing. You're doing awesome work. We've loved everything that you've helped us with in terms of lectures, discussions. So that's awesome to hear. It's a real blessing to have you, who I see as kind of an insider, right? You've experienced a lot of these things, and therefore we can hear firsthand from you on the world of peer review and these types of things. So it's really fascinating stuff, Sal.
Thank you. So to introduce the topic, there was a big debate on what the meaning of fitness is. And I have a little video of one of our favorite people here, SpeedOfSound.
Yeah.
Okay, so
one of our favorite critics.
So if I could say, what's the bottom line for everything? The problem with fitness in the evolutionary sense is that a beneficial mutation could be one that's damaging to the organism. So that means if there is a recent paper, some papers that have come out that said natural selection seems to favor getting stupider. All right, it was cited. I even mentioned it in passing in my second debate with Dr. Dan, that Michael Lynch is pointing that IQs are going down, and he cited Michael Lynch cited another work that was saying it looks like the reason the human race is getting dumber is that stupidity is a mutation.
Isn't that amazing? So
okay.
the type of change that took a single cell like ancestor into all the life we see today was the same thing that makes people stupider.
Okay, so now if you think my characterization is unfair, I've got a gem for you, because someone really took exception to my first discussion of Fisher's theorem of my first lecture on Fisher's fundamental theorem of natural selection, and that was speed of sound, none other than our beloved speed of sound. So I'm going to share this, and here is it from the horse's mouth. So we're talking about whether stupidity is a beneficial mutation, and I was criticizing him, and I said, Mike, this did my share come through?
No. So let's see. So make sure you are.
Oh, here. How about now? Let's see.
There we go. We got a real treat for you guys.
Oh,
One
yeah.
of our favorites. Speed of sound here. This is.
It could well be the best thing for the human race to get dumber and dumber until we lose our minds entirely. It could well be the best thing for the human race to get dumber and dumber until we lose our minds entirely. It could well be the best thing for the human race to get dumber and dumber until we lose our minds entirely. I mean, that may end up being the most reproductive, successful thing, right? But so be it.
How do you say that with a straight face? I mean, I think Speed of Sound deserves some kind of Academy Award there for not even a smile or anything. Sal, I think you're on mute.
Sorry.
I wanted to hear you laugh.
I wish I had that clip. I hope you'll use that clip for genetic entropy. And I want you to reuse it because
I will be.
And just if you have an opponent and ask him, is that correct that stupidity could be a beneficial mutation in evolutionary definition of fitness? So just confront him with that, and I could give you peer-reviewed papers to that effect too. I mean,
if stupidity can be a beneficial mutation, then I guess everything can be, according to the evolutionist definition of fitness. That's too funny.
So actually, this was a very efficient way of explaining the topic tonight. So if you had to say, what did Sal teach you? He showed me this video, Speed of Sound, saying maybe it'll be the best way for the human race to survive is to get dumber and dumber. Just think that. Okay, so
I think that 10-second clip alone, Sal, is going to convert some evolutionists to creation, to be honest with you. And all thanks to speed.
I think this is better than DNA's Diet Coke by Godless Engineer.
I didn't think it was possible to top that, but
all right.
Thanks to you. And
so I do have a more technical lecture, but I think I'm going to have to intersperse it a little bit with some humor. And I'm going to just have to keep repeating this video. If people are getting lost, it's Sal, what's your point? I'm like, okay, because I really did look for what's the best way to encapsulate what I'm really trying to say. And God bless Speed of Sound. He just gave, that was a gift.
Well, Gavin says, did Speed really say that? I just joined. He did. Yes, that was not doctored. That was not photoshopped by any means. I'm sure he'll just say he was just kidding, or no, maybe he really does think stupidity.
I had the link somewhere. This was I don't know if it's on his channel or it's on mine. It might be on mine. The best way to find out is you just ask any evolutionary biologist. First I'll give you the link to something. Let me provide a link because it's better if you actually have peer-reviewed literature that actually says what I just said. Right?
I'm not surprised. Some of the things I've read in the peer-reviewed literature. So I want to point out before I forget, a brilliant question that I've seen you ask your interlocutor many times. You asked it to Dr. Dan Stern Cardinale. You asked him, is there anybody that would honestly say man is getting better? I feel like every time you ask that question, you've instantly, like in a boxing match, you've instantly cornered them. There's no way to come back from it because nobody is really going to admit that man is presently improving, getting better? So I love when you ask that question.
Thank you. I thought I said, look at all these peer-reviewed things, and he didn't like me. The first thing he said, like in my first debate, I still remember it. I said, I wonder how he's going to react to this. And he said, oh, that's an argument from authority. I was just like, okay. And John Maddox said, you know what, Sal, you ought to do? You ought to say, okay, so you disagree with Michael Lynch, you disagree with Joe Felsenstein, you disagree with Dan Grauer. I said, the funny thing is they may be on his peer review committee.
Yeah. One day he's gonna be thinking, uh-oh, I publicly disagreed with them.
So John Maddox said, why don't you read this list off and just get him to say, yeah, that guy's wrong. That guy's wrong. Let's see how well that goes over.
Mr. Dan Stern Cardinale, are you publicly stating that you disagree with this man, this man, this man? That would be a perfect way to possibly get them to backtrack and take back what they may have said that disagrees with some of these scientists in the field. That's a great point.
Okay, so I'm going to read this. If I could share my screen again.
Yeah, I'll approve it right here for you.
So I know I didn't get heavy into Fisher's theorem, but I just heard the most important thing.
Yeah.
Stupidity, loss of limbs, loss of organs, loss of eyes. I mean, you name it. It could be beneficial. I said, that's the problem with the evolutionary definition of fitness. That's an informal way of stating it. But here is the renowned evolutionary biologist Michael Lynch. And if you didn't know, you wouldn't know that this was written by an evolutionary biologist. This was from the prestigious scientific journal Nature, like this year. It says here, within the field of population genetics, the phenomenon of mutational meltdown, in which a population may become extinct owing to the accumulation of deleterious mutations, has been well studied both theoretically and experimentally. The key to understanding this effect is a consideration of the efficacy of natural selection. Because there are many more ways to disrupt rather than to improve genomic function, the vast majority of new fitness impacting mutations are deleterious rather than beneficial. Thus, if mutation rates are increased, the result is a disproportionate excess of variants that are detrimental to the organism. Because natural selection will not be able to purge this input of deleterious mutations, if the mutational pressure is sufficiently large, these variants remain in the population and even reach fixation. The deleterious load further restricts the ability of natural selection to purge additional variants, allowing more deleterious mutations to accumulate and fix, and so on, a snowball effect that can result in the eventual loss of the population, i.e. mutational meltdown. Now, does that remind you of any particular creationist?
Well, if I didn't know any better, based on some of the quotes there that jump out at me, the vast majority of mutations impacting fitness are deleterious and not beneficial. Selection will not purge the influx of deleterious mutations. Deleterious variants will reach fixation. Can selection purge these additional variants? If I didn't know any better, I think this is Dr. Stanford.
I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you.
No problem. I was just
I'm going to provide
out
a link, and you could just follow that, the links to that.
Yeah, some of those key points that I got from it. If you didn't know any better, you'd think that was Dr. John Sanford. But according to the evolutionists, Dr. Sanford, made all this up and invented all of it. That is a great quote to start it off with. I'm going to put it into the chat. There we go for people to see.
So this is what I think is great is when I could just spew off quotes just from evolutionary literature. It's like,
you're right. We could be here all day just spewing off quotes.
Okay, so here's another one. Let's see if I could just.
I like what he said at the end there about the snowball effect that will inevitably lead to population degeneration and extinction. Because that's exactly what it is. That's a great way to put it.
So here is Michael Lynch again, and he's quoting. He said, "Mutation and human exceptionalism are future genetic load." He says, "Thus, without any compelling counter-arguments at this time, it remains difficult to escape the conclusion that numerous physical and psychological attributes are likely to slowly deteriorate in technologically advanced societies. The incidences of a variety of afflictions, including autism, male infertility, asthma, immune system disorders, diabetes, already exhibit increases exceeding the expected rate. This observational work may substantially underestimate the mutational vulnerability of the world's most complex organ, the human brain. Because human brain function is governed by the expression of thousands of genes, the germline mutation rate to physiological disorders may be unusually high. At least 30% of individuals with autism spectrum disorders appear to acquire such behaviors by de novo mutation.
Wow.
It has been suggested that there has been a slow decline in intelligence in the United Kingdom over the past century." And he cites Woodley 2015. So let me read this. This is a little bit convoluted. This relates again to our topic tonight about the worthless definition of evolutionary fitness. Okay.
I love it.
So deleterious mutations. Okay, so a deleterious mutation could be one where the organs are compromised. A neutral mutation can be one where the organs are compromised. A beneficial mutation can be one where the organs, like the brain, are compromised. And just like, well, how good is that as a definition? Stupidity, losing organs, losing eyes, losing body parts, losing genes, and those are beneficial mutations. How good of a definition of fitness is that? And So what I have said, it's like, guys, you got to be careful about using deleterious, neutral, and beneficial, because a beneficial mutation in the evolutionary sense can also be bad juju.
Great point.
So
well, I want to point out, I've adopted your terminology in discussions and debates where you point out that we should say functionally compromising. And I really, really think that says it perfectly, because you're right. According to the evolutionists, beneficial can mean something that's reductive, something that's a loss, something that's damaging is beneficial to the evolutionists, because they're using that, as the title says, worthless definition of fitness. So I really like that term, functionally compromising.
Okay, so I'm going to read this where Michael Lynch got his data was from Woodley. And I'm going to read Woodley here. It said, abstract 2, dysgenic models of declining general intelligence have been proposed. The first posits that since the industrial evolution, those with low G have a reproductive advantage over those with high G. Okay, so let me just uncoil this. Low G means you're stupid. High G means you're smart. So he's saying being dumb has a reproductive advantage. Okay, that's just kind of that's the dark, that's the techno speak for. Okay, what SpeedOfSound said, he echoed what is in this peer-reviewed paper, where he said it may well be that to save the human race, everyone has to get dumber and dumber. Okay, this is echoing what's in the peer-reviewed paper. So this is what I was trying. I've been trying to tell creationists when genetic entropy was published, they were using, it was still aligned with the evolutionary definition of fitness, and it still made its case. If we add even this correction factor where we're realizing, as Michael Behe did, so the book Genetic Entropy was written in 2005. Behe's book, Darwin Devolves, and some of his other papers showed that the vast majority of beneficial mutations are also breaking function. That was actually new. It was great getting it in peer reviewed, his first law of adaptive evolution. So this is making genetic entropy even worse. It's not just deleterious mutations in the evolutionary sense, it's beneficial mutations. Okay, so this is like adding gasoline to the fire.
Yes, so that's exactly what it is.
Yeah. So you can read this where it talks about the decline of intelligence. So going back to our beloved friend, this is a good time to reshare my screen and have just to let's review our lesson today.
Well, I think at this point, just from what we've said so far, evolution that's it. It's dead in the water. Redefine living says, ouch. Yeah, that's
okay. So
it's a big
okay,
ouch for the evolution.
class. I'd like you to learn from an evolutionary guy, our beloved SpeedOfSound, who's taught me, God bless him, on organic chemistry. Let me share his own words, and we will learn from him. He's always been trying to school us.
Professor SpeedOfSound.
So he's always been trying to school us, and we're going to just say, Professor, this is the greatest lesson you ever gave. So here it goes again.
It could well be the best thing for the human race to get dumber and dumber until we lose our minds entirely. I mean, that may end up being the most reproductive, successful thing. So be it. That's what we're modeling. It could well be the best thing for the human race to get dumber and dumber until we lose our minds entirely. I mean, that may end up being the most reproductive, successful thing. Right?
So, I love your face expression. I could tell you're trying to hold back your laugh as hard as possible.
Oh my goodness.
But here on Standing for Truth, you don't have to hold back your laugh, Sal. Just let it out. Professor SpeedOfSound. I want to say one thing. Interacting with SpeedOfSound and seeing SpeedOfSound say these things over and over again, it's actually increased my faith in genetic entropy being a fact. You can help me see how much more true and factual genetic entropy is. So SpeedOfSound, if you're listening, I want to thank you for that. We appreciate it.
Yeah, that's a classic quote, and I don't see why he should back down from that. That is in evolutionary literature. Okay, so this is maybe that was.
I love how you destroy evolution from their own literature. From their own quotes, their own sayings, their own writings. I love how you do that because they can't get out of it.
Oh, thank you. Well, that's actually the hard part, finding that. And no disrespect to Dr. Jensen, the main reason I don't quote him is he's a creationist. I try to find evolutionists saying, kind of just taking the gun and blowing their own brains out.
Yeah. That's exactly, and it's extremely effective.
And unfortunately, that's kind of painful research because I don't like reading evolutionary literature, but that's where you'll get some of the gems.
Oh, you really find the gems because I find that in their own literature, their guard is down. I've been doing that a lot lately with human evolution and like the hominin fossil record, for example, because going through contested bones, I'm going through all the different papers. And like you said, in their own literature, that's where you find all the hidden gems that you can use against them. So your advice on that, I think everybody should take that advice because it is such a good approach, Sal.
And, before they used to say they're accusing us of quote mining. And I'm like, well, maybe that was in the past, but it's gotten to the point they're practically making their case for us. We don't,
well, let me ask you,
so clear. And that's why Dr. Sanford got invited to the National Institutes of Health. It got to be at some point, okay, these are medical doctors studying heritable disease and medical researchers. It's like at some point you just got to deal with reality. If we are getting sicker, you got to deal with it. You can't be, whitewashing this over and saying our genomes are improving when they're not. You got to tell the condition of the patient. That's just ethical. And that's kind of what's happening. I mean, it's kind of genetic entropy is really sad. So this whole discussion kind of took a turn I didn't expect.
No, this has been a blast.
SpeedOfSound did because I was going to give you my whole technical. Can I show you my technical paper?
Yeah, of course. Yeah. Actually, Sal, this is flying by. Take a whole nother hour if you have to.
We may restart the stream or something. But I thought the way we did it with SpeedOfSound would be so much better than. Did I get stream shared here? Do you see
let me see. There you are. Yeah. Boom. You're good.
I figured SpeedOfSound could summarize my arguments far better than if I walked you through the math. You get so my published peer-reviewed paper. Again, this was in an ID-friendly venue, not like the secular venues. This goes through some of the real details. These are just for the real math nerds out there. So I think in the interest of time for our audience in this venue, I'm not going to cover all the math. This is it's not as good as SpeedOfSound summarizing the bottom line.
Okay,
Okay,
SpeedOfSound did it for us, so thank you, Speed.
He did it. He came through. We gotta just say, awesome job. And I love the guy, and we were on good terms. But people were right when they saw that I was just really trying to hold my laughter.
Yeah. Oh,
when he was saying that, I was just thinking I was being kind of devious. I was like, oh my goodness, I got him now. It's like, I was thinking, please, Lord, don't let this video die, or some problem with recording, because I need to clip this out and share it with the world.
And you did, Sal, and I'm so glad you did.
So how long has our stream been going so far?
Sal, don't even worry about time, brother.
Okay,
Sal.
so we're now
Time
at
is
about
flying
an
by,
hour.
so that's okay.
Okay,
That's
so
okay. We can go for 2 hours if you want, however long because you know what, this is too much fun. The chat's having a blast, and you are really giving it to the evolutionists, and I'm liking it. So take your time, Sal. No rush.
Okay, so now it's going to be a little bit boring. So I take no offense if people start to drop off now, because this is now going to be just the real science part. So at least I wanted to put everyone in a good mood, and we'll just talk in a scholarly fashion here about the topic of fitness.
We're switching gears. Even when it's technical, Sal, you're still not boring. So I don't think anyone's going to be dropping off. Before you start, though, I'm compelled to ask a serious question. In your opinion, or from your experience, are there any serious population geneticists that would not agree that man is presently degenerating?
I don't know of any. That's and when Daniel, Dr. Dan, was in my second debate, he quoted a experiment, both the theoretical paper and experiments. The theoretical paper by Ewens, and he cited experiments, lab experiments, that the mutation rates will stop getting so deleterious, or something like that.
Yeah.
And the creature will not die. That was the first that I heard it. In looking back, I wanted to say, well, what about the experiments where the creatures do die and accumulate? Because then about 2 months later, that article by Lynch came out. And I wanted to, follow up if I had the time or the inclination, because of late I'm just going back a little bit about some of the peer-reviewed work that I'm going into. And I'm also, by the way, I may be finishing my work with Dr. Sanford, and I may be trying to do teaching. So we don't know what's going to happen with my future work there. I may be moving on, and I'm extremely grateful for having the privilege of working for him for 6.5 years. So next year I might be kind of on splitting time between working for him and other interests. Because I'm having so much fun doing stuff like this, I might be doing more like this. And I might have the privilege of working with some professors who are creationists at secular universities. They're wanting to get their work out, and we might be making free of charge lessons, or maybe even paid lessons, just to teach basic, just so they could make arguments like this. So we'll just see where it goes.
I love it. We could probably have you on every single week doing a lecture.
Oh, thanks.
So if teaching is something you want to pursue, you're an awesome teacher. So
thank you. So where I was headed with that, how I got on that bunny trail was that Dr. Dan said that there were experiments that prove this. You see, I get tired of just following everything that they say. I just like, guys, I've wasted too many years of my life just reading garbage. And I feel like I'm a janitor. My role is a janitor. I have to go clean up other people's poop. and I'm just like, I get tired of it. I enjoy studying biology and the complexity of it more. And that's where my some of my new work will be. I'm going to be studying protein structure and using bioinformatics to elucidate protein folds and stuff with post-translational modifications, and just kind of the incredible complexity of how man is fearfully and wonderfully made, just as it said in Psalms. But to Dan's comment that there were experiments, if I were to follow up on it, I said, was this done with bacteria or viruses?
Right.
Because humans are very, very, very much more sensitive to mutation. And that secular peer-reviewed article that I co-authored, that I provided a link to, that was actually providing experimental evidence to that effect. You can take the same protein in a human and look at a homolog, like say in yeast, or a homolog that's even in bacteria, because there are topoisomerase homologs throughout all.
Right.
To my knowledge, I don't know any creature that doesn't have it. There probably could be, but there are the experimental evidence that we showed actually shows that humans have a huge number of post-translational modifications. That means these little chemical modifications that are kind of like enhancements to the amino acids. And there are hundreds of them in the human. There are only 11 reported for yeast, and there are none reported for bacteria. That means you can't use a bacteria or even or a virus to be doing these experiments to try to model how humans respond.
Exactly.
And I just wanted to say, Dan, Dr. Dan,
you'd think that'd be common.
What kind of model organism are you using? I mean, I never followed up on it, but I just wanted to say this is a game changer. And
right.
I'm privileged to work with Dr. DeWeese that we found this. I said, hey, Joe, this is kind of shocking. In fact, I didn't know this. Even if you take human proteins and they say, well, those proteins are in, lowly yeast, the way that they're implemented in the human is so much more sensitive to damage. So this is like saying, okay, you have like in the yeast something like a biplane, just a piston-powered biplane. In the human, it's a jet plane that can fly at high altitude. It's and evolutionary biologists say, well, that was just random mutation. I'm just like, no, there's a problem with that, because why is it that as you go up the ladder of what we would consider higher organisms, even the same protein across species is more complex, substantially more. And in that paper that I linked to was experimental evidence. We were providing that. So I don't know how I got on that. We were just talking about Dr. Dan. We get on so many tangents.
Well, it's commonplace on this channel with interviews and discussions where we chase a lot of rabbits, and I love it. So I think everything you were just speaking on is reflection of our amazing creator and designer. So I don't know how anybody could deny that. And you've given us fascinating lectures on that protein structure, structural design, and I recommend everybody listen to those because they were awesome.
Thank you. So now we have the more formal part. Fisher's fundamental theorem of natural selection isn't fundamental after all. This was published this past August in the Blythe Institute, Communications to the Blythe Institute, which is an ID sympathetic secular organization. So I'm just going to read from the abstract. Forgive me, and then I'll pause and explain a little bit. Fisher's fundamental theorem of natural selection, FTNS, was called biology's central theorem. FTNS might possibly have been accorded this status for decades because Fisher himself declared his own theorem to be fundamental to biology. However, the idea that Fisher's theorem is biology's central theorem is by and large a myth promoted by popular science writers like Richard Dawkins. Joe Felsenstein, when delivering the 2018 Fisher Memorial Lecture, declared that FTNS was, quote, alas, not so fundamental, end quote. One may be hard-pressed to find a biology textbook or biology student who can explain how FTNS helps them understand biology. Even the meaning and proof of FTNS have remained contentious even to this day. So Richard Dawkins was going around saying, "Oh, we have biology's central theorem." He probably couldn't state it accurately, by the way, himself. And he was saying that he was the greatest thing since Darwin's Origin of Species, Fisher's book on the genetical theory of natural selection, where he gave this fundamental theorem. And the funny thing is, if you ask biologists what's the fundamental theorem, what's biology's central theorem, they couldn't state it. So here's another example of, we're talking about hoaxes and myth. This is another myth. This is another myth. The fundamental theorem of natural selection is another myth. It has been used to kind of give the appearance that natural selection is rigorous, when it's more or less a farce. Okay, so, but I mean, what'll happen is if you read population genetic literature, can you hang on? I may need a commercial break. Hang on.
Of course, yeah, no problem. Okay, good to see everybody in the chat. Caleb, you're making me laugh. Yes, I've been slacking. I've been doing the old insanity workout though. SFT has to stay strong battling these evolutionists. So a couple announcements while Brother Sal is gone for a bit. We've got this Thursday, the rescheduled debate with Dr. Dino. Ken Hovind will be back with us to debate Derek Barnes. If you haven't yet seen it, please watch Dr. Rob Stadler. We had him on the channel just a couple days ago, educating Professor Dave on abiogenesis. Professor Dave came out with a video defending the indefensible abiogenesis and attempting to refute Dr. James Tour. Give me a break. How impossible would that be? So we had Dr. Rob Stadler on. He was awesome. And he, as far as I'm concerned, he demolished Professor Dave. So, and I say professor very loosely, quote unquote. If you haven't yet watched it, Dr. Rob Carter we had on last week, Evidence for Biblical Creation, Adam and Eve, the first couple. That was awesome. If you want to pick up our Standing for Truth gear, we got all the goodies, all the books, the shirts. There's my coffee mug right there, Pond Scum to People. I'm having a coffee right now, actually. This is, anytime I got Sal on here, time flies by. So we got a lot for everybody to look forward to. Everybody in the chat looks like they're having fun. We're always very, very lively. Wes in the house says, I don't know SFT, but rumor has it he was a champion wrestler in high school. Who told you the truth about SFT? Honesty Angel, good to see you. Jay Martin, thanks so much for the $5 super chat. You're putting my kids through college. Wes, $1.49 super sticker. George Bond says, just because Caleb said there aren't any super chats, $5. Thank you so much, George. Thanks for the support, guys. Our goal is to do this full time. So only with your support can you guys make that possible. We've got a lot of good interviews, discussions, and debates scheduled for you guys to enjoy. Mitchell, $5 super chat. Thank you so much. Shreeded, $10 super chat. Thank you. We appreciate it. Shreeded says, but I thought these progressive evolutionists were about affirming their pride by evolving to higher fitness, not through degradation due to evolution. Evolutionists are so confusing. They are. Beneficial mutations are rare. We're accumulating in the nuclear DNA, we're accumulating 100 new mutations per person per generation. Most of those being invisible to selection. Selection, sure. Selection can amplify your best beneficial mutations, can get rid of your most detrimental mutations, but it can do nothing about your nearly neutral mutations that are accumulating, slowly degenerating biological information systems. Now, here's what's funny. Even though they're beneficial mutations, the ones that occur, they're rare. Roughly 1 in a million. When they do occur, they're reductive. They're still not taking things forward. Anyways, Sal, good to have you back. I just wanted to make sure there was no dead air, so I had some fun with the live chat. And the floor is yours. Go ahead.
Well, thank you. If I could explain what was going on. My mom, let me just offer a word of praise. Lord Jesus, thank you that my mom's okay, and please take care of her. And thank you for the miracles you've worked in her life. In Jesus' name, amen. So I just want to acknowledge my Lord and Savior. Just for the audience, the reason I sometimes have to take commercial breaks, my mom has been in and out of hospice care. in 2018, through the prayers of many people, after she was sent home to die, people in my congregation came and filled our room. She was lying down in her hospital bed with all these tubes connected to her, and they prayed because I thought she'd only had 7 days to live. Well, she recovered, and she's still alive, and that's motivated me to try to work hard while she's still with me. And I'm hoping there'll be more papers that are published. It really meant a lot to her. Some of you heard Dr. Stadler just tear down, quote unquote, Professor Dave. It meant a lot to Mom to see my name. You'll see my name if you have Dr. Stadler's book, The Stairway to Life. Look in the acknowledgments. You'll see my name. That meant a lot to Mom. So in case you're wondering why I may have to take a commercial break every now and then, it's to just to make sure she's okay, and she's okay. So,
Amen. Amen. Well, she's raised a tremendous son. You've been an incredible blessing. And like you said, The Stairway to Life, Dr. Rob Stadler, page 217, acknowledgments. I've got it right in front of me. There's your name, Sal Cordova. So as always, you're a blessing, Sal.
Thank you. So I got to tell you something. This is, if you look at all this math, because this looks like evolutionary biology math, this is actually a proof of the discrete version of Fisher's theorem. And this is the sort of stuff you'd use in a bar to impress the girls, right? The salad bar. Sorry. Anyway, if you look at this, you'll say, oh, this looks so profound. It has to be right. It's all theatrics, guys. It's garbage. Garbage. I restated the theorem here, and it's correct mathematically, but it's meaningless. Why is it meaningless? Do you remember the words speed of sound? He said it may well be that the best way to, to save the human race is to get dumber and dumber. Okay, so you could use Fisher's theorem to prove that.
I think he's watched the movie with Jim Carrey, Dumb and Dumber, a little too many times.
Oh,
I guess that's where we're heading as a human species.
So the point is the math isn't garbage. It's beautiful math. But when the meaning of fitness is just garbage to begin with, you end up with a garbage conclusion. The math just makes it more solid that it's garbage. So I don't want you to be, I'm not, for those interested, we provided the links to this paper. So for the math nerds out there, just knock yourselves out. A lot of the math was actually adapted just from Joe Felsenstein's book. My role was to kind of improve the notation a little bit and clarify it. So the paper is landmark only in the sense that it was meant to be just purely for education, just so people could see what all this math is. And my point was, hey guys, if you really understand what some of this is, you'll just realize it's theatrics. It's pretend science. It's not real science. And people have gone years and years and doing all these equations, publishing math like this in peer-reviewed journals. And what do you get? You get just imagine me replaying the clip of Speed of Sound at this point. Okay, that's where it leads. But I did provide some of the math just for those curious, and they could see that it's basically smoke and mirrors. It's nothing of substance. So going back to Fisher's theorem, from the perspective of biophysical rather than population growth notions of fitness, natural selection might be more accurately described as an agent against the increase of complexity rather than an agent for it. So natural selection is an agent against increase of complexity rather than an agent for it. What does that mean? Darwin's theory of natural selection was that, natural selection is always picking out the best and it's going to keep improving. That was his vision for how a very primitive creature could end up evolving into a bird or a human being. So the idea was that selection is always picking out more complexity. The problem is, as Speed of Sound, our Professor Speed of Sound pointed out, that complexity, stupidity could be a beneficial mutation. So now if that opens the door that beneficial mutations, when you have beneficial mutations that are actually damaging a function, this puts a new picture on everything. And in fact, if we consider that Michael Behe was able to demonstrate that the vast majority of beneficial mutations are function compromising, this puts a new spin on things, because now natural selection is not an agent of preserving and accumulating functional complexity. It's an agent for destroying it. So that changes everything. So I suggested in my paper, thus metaphorically speaking, some sort of anti-weasel model of natural selection might better describe how selection actually works in nature rather than Dawkins' weasel or other man-made genetic algorithms. So a lot of times when we're talking about evolution, some guy will weigh in, what about all these genetic algorithms? And I'll just say, well, does it model complexity going up or down? A lot of them model complexity going up. And I said, well, how is that legitimate? Because that's not what we see by direct observation. So the main focus of the article, however, was to kind of just teach people the language of population genetics. And we'll see how much we can fit in time. But I want to point out some things from their own, from evolutionary biologists themselves. Okay, so these are quotes. This is in Salvador Cordova making it up, because I really love quoting evolutionary biologists. Right now, my favorite evolutionary biologist has to be SpeedOfSound. Oh my goodness, he's like my number one. But I'll quote some others. In order to understand the Fisher's fundamental theorem of natural selection, it is helpful to understand the definition of fitness which Fisher was using. This is not so trivial a problem, because in a 2009 paper on fitness, Alan Orr quipped, biologists have offered a staggering number of definitions of fitness. And worse, Richard Lewontin lamented, quote, it is not entirely clear what fitness is, end quote. Okay, this is not a good situation. This is not a good situation. And Andreas Wagner, in his book on robustness, this was maybe 15 years ago or so. Oh, 2005, yes. He wrote, however, quote, however, fitness is hard to define rigorously and even more difficult to measure. An examination of fitness and its robustness alone would thus not yield much insight into the opening questions. Instead, it is necessary to analyze on all levels of organization the systems that constitute an organism and that sustain its life. I define such systems loosely as assemblies of parts that carry out well-defined biological functions. End quote. So he says, I define systems loosely as assemblies of parts that carry out well-defined biological functions. And he's saying it's hard to define fitness rigorously. So the point of this whole lecture that I've had the privilege of presenting to you tonight was that the worthless definition of evolutionary fitness. Their own literature is already suggesting that, because they can't even define their own, what they said is a very central concept. They're having a real hard time defining it. And that's evidence right there. Richard Lewontin's a great, very respected guy. He said it's hard to define. And one can say he's sort of kind of given up on the whole concept. So I want to focus on what Andreas Wagner said. He says, I define such systems loosely as assemblies of parts that carry out well-defined functions. Does that sound familiar to any of you? I want to point out, when it comes out of an ID guy, what it sounds like. So systems loosely, ironically, quote, systems loosely as assemblies of parts that carry out well-defined biological functions, end quote, sounds remarkably similar to Michael Behe's definition of irreducible complexity, end quote. This is Behe now. A single system composed of several well-matched interacting parts that contribute to the basic function of the system, end quote. So what ends up happening is, oh, we're going to ban, they realize the problem with defining biological function in terms of evolutionary fitness. They go now into talking about, parts that interact, assemblies of parts. And Behe stated it better. So this is really kind of funny. They kind of like, well, we don't want to, it's kind of, fitness is kind of an embarrassment, but the way to really understand function is not through reproductive success. The way to study, to understand function is in terms of irreducible complexity. They won't use that word, but what are they doing? They're implicitly doing that. So Are there any thoughts so far before I go on?
Sorry, Sal, I was on mute. No, I think everything you're saying is awesome. Like you pointed out a few minutes ago, what we're looking at is these changes are oftentimes compromising to the function of organisms. And you pointed out correctly that natural selection is not a mechanism that you said preserves functionality, it destroys it. And they have such a problem defining fitness as well, as is seen in their own literature and quotes. So no, everything you're saying is awesome.
Thank you. So I see that I probably could wrap this up in maybe 10, 15 minutes if I skip all the math. And that's probably what I'm going to do. And then we could just open it up for questions or whatever. And I'm sorry to be just reading from my paper, but
no, I'm enjoying
I forget
it.
Sometimes what even I write, so I need to remind myself.
I got to say, Sal, I think everyone's having a good time. The chat's lively. We've still got 25 plus people in the chat, so you take your time. No rush. None of us are. I know I'm not bored. I could listen to you lecture all day, Sal.
Thank you. The population genetic evolutionary biology definition of fitness seems disconnected, if not offensive, to common sense notion of fitness used by the medical and engineering community. For example, in the medical sense, sickle cell anemia is a heritable trait that can lead to sickness, but it is viewed as quote unquote beneficial, as a beneficial adaptation in the population genetic evolutionary sense. So there's a case in point. There are even more of these where like Tay-Sachs disease, sickle cell anemia, others are, they're actually functional compromises, but they're viewed as beneficial. That's why this, when they're arguing about deleterious, neutral, and beneficial, it's like, guys, it's a little more subtle than that. And this is the reason why. Natural selection could selectively favor loss of optical structure in Gammarus minus. That's a creature. It's an aquatic creature that dwells in caves, or tusks in elephants. By the way, thank you, Dr. Dan. Dr. Dan was the one who gave me that reference, that selection favors loss of tusks in elephants. So that little hat tip to Dr. Dan there. That was not, he actually gave me that data point. So Alan Orr used the example of Gammarus minus. And let's see if I have a quote. He used it to chide Daniel Dennett, who's a big natural selection advocate. He used it to chide Daniel Dennett's naive views of natural selection. Or when Orr pointed out, okay, so this is quoting Orr. In reality, selection sees only brute birth, death, and reproduction, and knows nothing of design, with a capital D, I like that. Knows nothing of design. Selection, sheer, cold demographics is just as happy to lay waste to the kind of design we associate with engineering as to build it. Consider the eyes of cave organisms who live in total darkness. If eyes are expensive to make, selection can wreck their exquisite engineering just as surely as it built it. An optic nerve with little or no eye is most assuredly not the sort of design one expects on an engineer's blueprint, but we find it in Gammarus minus. Whether or not this kind of evolution is common, it betrays the fundamental error in thinking of selection as trading in the currency of design. And this was in 1996. So it was still an open question whether this kind of beneficial mutation, which is compromise of function, is common. Behe established that, and we're seeing it all over the place now. So this is really embarrassment. So I'll just continue, and I'm just citing literature. So those who like references, this one has lots of references. And you'll see the bibliography and reference section if you want to look this up. So I said, in fact, quoting myself, in fact, reductive evolution, loss of genes and functions rather than constructive evolution, appears to be the dominant mode of evolution throughout most of geological history, but punctuated with episodes of complexification that have no clear mechanistic explanation. Reductive evolution has also been confirmed by direct observation in the field and in the laboratory to be the dominant mode of evolution. That's Behe's paper on adaptive evolution. This is in contrast to a widespread and long-standing historic and present belief that natural selection generally leads to increase in complexity. And the basis for these beliefs are not rooted in empiricism, but either conjecture or computer simulation far removed from actual experiments. So the idea of Darwin's idea of complexity building up, that's not actually been confirmed by any direct observation. So I'm going to see. Amusingly, the paucity of direct examples of complexity increase and abundance of complexity decrease by natural selection was unwittingly highlighted by Sharon Molem's book, Survival of the Sickest, where he argues why we need birth defects like Tay-Sachs disease on account of natural selection. Furthermore, Molem went on to celebrate the facts of disease as evidence of Darwin's genius. So let me see if I have a little slide here. Is that okay? Just so you know, I'm not kidding. Here's the book, Survival of the Sickest, and you could see the subtitle: A Medical Maverick Discovers Why We Need Disease. Okay, so this is all based on the idea of natural selection, and I'm just pointing out the examples of complexity increase are so rare that they've now had to salvage their theory of natural selection. They have to now be appealing to beneficial mutations that are created by functional compromise. So let me just read on a little bit. There are a variety of notions of the term fit, and the population genetic evolutionary definition, elaborated below, seems idiosyncratic relative to historical and common sense notions of the word. An aircraft is fit to fly. A submarine is fit to operate underwater. A car is fit to operate on land. A spaceship in space, etc. None of these notions of fit need be conflated with reproductive success. Biophysicists have established eyes are fit to sense and count individual photons, that bacteria can count individual molecules, that sharks are fit to sense electric fields in conditions at the extreme limit permissible by physics, and birds are fit to fly and navigate thousands of miles via compasses that leverage quantum spin chemistry. So any comments? What I'm trying to say is you can define fit in the engineering sense. You don't need anything to do with evolutionary fitness. In fact, it's just a disaster. So any comments?
No, I think everything you're saying is really hitting home for a lot of people, because they're even more interested right now on all the articles and papers that you referenced throughout the talk so far. So I'm going to repost them into the comment section, because the chat's been so lively, Sal, that their comments are flying by too fast. They can't see the links anymore. So I'm just gonna, if you want to continue, Sal,
okay, I'll continue.
I'll repost the links for people. They're loving it.
Okay, so did our chats just kind of die? Oh no, it's still alive. Great. So
oh yeah, no, it's working. It's just a lot of people are talking, so we can't see the chats from say like a half an hour ago, because there's been so I'm just gonna repost your links if you want to continue talking, Sal.
Oh, thank you. So this is Fisher's. Okay, so although the definition and treatment of fitness in the population genetic evolutionary sense may seem irrelevant, if not repugnant to common sense notions of fitness, in the medical engineering sense, one cannot understand Fisher's theorem without understanding the population genetic evolutionary definition of fitness. So the next section is just showing how they define it. So I'm going to show you how it's defined. I'm going to give, let me point out something funny. A lot of people don't know this. Okay, so I got a lot of the definitions from Joe Felsenstein's book, Evolutionary Theoretical Genetics. It's a graduate level book. It's available for free, which is great. You can get it from his website, last I saw. So it says here, I'm going to point out, however, the staggering amount of population genetic literature that uses such simplistic definitions does not at all imply these population genetic models are accurate or useful. So Felsenstein himself, who writes the kind of the Bible of population genetics, he points out, quote, Fishers and Wright's one-locus equations turn out to be approximations, sometimes bad ones. The mathematical tools at hand have not revolutionized our understanding of the evolutionary process. Many evolutionists will fail to find the clear and simple messages that population genetics theory once seemed to promise. So let me uncoil this. People for a long time thought, oh, let's just throw math at the problem at natural selection and evolutionary theory, and we're going to figure everything out. We're going to figure everything out if we throw all this high-powered math, and we'll show that this really works. Well, that failed. And this is the way Felsenstein basically expressed it. He said, many evolutionists, and isn't that really cute? He calls them evolutionists.
Yeah. But yet when we call them evolutionists, they're then told to not take us seriously.
Yeah. Okay, so
Standard.
all right. Felsenstein's probably the number one population geneticist. He said, many evolutionists fail to find the clear and simple messages that population genetics theory once seemed to promise. Okay, so I'm already basically saying, is that the impression you get from popular literature, by the way? They try to give the impression that, oh, this is so solid and it's so proven, and we have all this good, gobs and gobs of math to prove it. And quietly, there's some integrity here, by the way, that he would say that. You'll find it in obscure passages where they kind of like, oh my, this is really not so good. Our life work is kind of crumbling. And I really do, by the way, I do respect people when they're just bluntly honest like that, and they call a spade a spade.
It really does show integrity, especially in light of, like you said, when the evidence is crumbling their worldview, just like our genome is crumbling from genetic entropy. So yeah, like you said earlier, that's where you find the hidden gems. Right, and it's those with integrity that are kind of admitting to these problems.
Okay, so I'm going to skip some of all the. Okay, unfortunately, the rest of the section I'm showing reads like a math book, and I'm going to just try to maybe actually really simple here. There are two kinds of fitness. One is absolute, and one is relative. So absolute fitness is just basically given a few qualifications, but this is a simplistic one. It's how many babies a parent has. So a species, or let's say let's say a genotype ends up causing the parents to have 4 kids. Each for every individual, there's 4 kids on average. So we'll just take a hypothetical. This is a purely educational model where we have a haploid population, asexual reproduction. So one parent will have a certain number of kids. And by the way, all the parents have all the kids at the same time in the most simplistic model. That just makes it easier. There are ways we can adjust this for the math, but the way that we try to introduce it is with these simple models, just so you can understand the gist of it. And then the models get refined a little more. So we could say a very fit gene in a population pool causes the parents, say hypothetically, to have 4 kids. And one that's not so fit has just 3 kids, and one not quite as fit has 2 kids. This is very simple. That's a hypothetical example. So we could say the absolute fitness is 4.0, 3.0, or 2.0. It's basically saying how many kids they're making on average. And that's absolute definition of fitness. You could see why this is basically a worthless definition.
Absolutely.
What are you going to conclude? Okay, so let's say the allele makes someone really stupid. He ends up having 4 kids. Or like in the case of Octomom, 14 kids. All right. Yeah. And, oh, by the way, Richard Dawkins only has 1. Okay. So,
right, exactly. So if it comes down to who's having the most kids, who's reproducing the most, he's not doing too well by evolution standards.
This is interesting. I mean, it's evolutionary biologists say, oh, you're picking out individuals, it's supposed to be population traits. Okay, granted, that was more of a joke, okay? But it was really funny. I showed one time I had a picture of Richard Dawkins and then Octomom beside him. I said, who's more fit? Who's more reproductively fit?
Well, if it's so obvious that the evolutionary definition of fitness is worthless, Sal, as you said so correctly, why can't the evolutionists see it? Or do they see it and they just don't want to admit it? That's kind of what I suspect.
I don't know. If you go back to the second debate with Dr. Dan, there was that passage, there was that segment when I kind of lost my temper. I said, definition of evolutionary fitness is garbage. I said, Dan, it's garbage. He's saying, you got to read, you don't have the right to redefine it yourself. I said, it's garbage, Dan.
Right.
And I'll tell you,
well, I found that was his only argument the entire debate was, oh, you can't redefine fitness. But it wasn't a very convincing argument. It was almost kind of like he was indirectly admitting defeat, and you were calm, cool, collected. You did a great job, Sal.
So that was the one time I just kind of was like a little bit irritated. I said, Dan, this is garbage. This is garbage. So are they going to change it? Well, what do they have? Darwin's Origin of Species is going to fall apart because the idea is beneficial mutations are complexity growing. If you give that away, you've given away the store.
Right. Good point.
And the thing is, all this mathy stuff and all these papers, and you know what they call that? Obfuscation. Yeah. Where you just throw up so much stuff. Smoke screens and all their all their unique terminology. That by the way, the reason I partly wrote this paper, when I first read some of the population genetic literature, I said, your notation makes no sense. And I have undergrad in math, and then I have a master's in physics, and I've seen a lot of math, okay? More than the average person, not as much as like Bill Basner and some of the mathematicians in the ID community. But I'm like, I don't understand the notation. I said, this is all kind of like specialized, and it took me a while to learn it. So part of the reason I was trying to go through this exercise, I said, it can't be just smoke and mirrors, right? And it was. And I wanted to learn their language. And I realized, oh my goodness, it looks impressive superficially. It looks so impressive and profound. But when you actually scrutinize it, you're just like, oh my goodness, it's vacuous. So is there incentive at this point to kind of point that, for the entire community to be self-correcting? I don't see a lot of it. And as I pointed out with my paper that got rejected 7 times, and they're saying your conclusion
with the correct conclusion.
I'm like, okay, I get it, guys. You're not interested in self-correcting. You're very interested in keeping a very nice public face. Thank God you're not making airplanes, because the public would not tolerate this if you had to tell the truth to save people's lives. But, because people don't lose their lives, maybe their souls over this. It's like, that's okay with you guys. All right. I mean, that's kind of a mean thing to say, but I've gotten a little fed up with what I'm seeing. I'm just like, you're just letting this stuff go.
Right.
And you're building.
We've been dealing with it for so many years, Sal. You've got a right to be upset.
See, one of the problems is they don't have an experiment that would refute this. They could just make these assertions, and
that's all I've ever seen is assertions, storyboards. Like Dr. Dan, he always says, well, the mathematics doesn't support genetic entropy. But I feel like that's just an assertion because, and I guess what are your thoughts on this? Because the numerous papers that I've read on like Mendel's accountant when it comes to genetic entropy, the limits of selection, and so on and so forth, plus everything that I'm hearing you say and everything that you've taught us, it seems like it's quite the opposite of what Dr. Dan says. The mathematics do support genetic entropy. What are your thoughts on that assertion, Sal?
I think we don't have to talk about mathematics. The data support it.
Good.
That's the bottom line.
Good point.
And at this point, it's good. It's kind of a mixed bag. I thank God that Dr. Sanford pointed this out because it heartened the creationist community. But we don't have to use the word genetic entropy anymore. We can just cite evolutionary literature like Michael Lynch.
Right.
And say, well, how does that square? Because you see, what they're doing here is they're trying to make the issue about what Dr. Sanford said. They're not trying to because if they actually were trying to deal with the actual issue, for like if you went through the things that Dr. Lynch pointed out, and even ironically Dr. Grauer, this is what they call changing the subject. They're trying to make this whole thing about Dr. Sanford and what he says and all the minutiae. They go down into minutia.
It's a rabbit trail. It's
okay,
a red
if you remember in the second debate, I pointed out, I said, Dan, the earlier editions said all mutations were deleterious. The new one said most. The new version of genetic entropy said most. Dr. Dan said so.
Yeah, I remember.
Dr. Sanford, I said, dude.
Semantics is what that is.
That's semantics.
Yeah, he's the king of semantics. He's almost at this point like talking to a wall. I'm sorry if that sounds mean, but we've interacted with him enough that it was just straight up semantics.
So what I did is I said, I'm just going to cut through all this. I said, do you think the human genome's improving or not?
Yeah, great question.
I said, that's the debate with that. The way that I describe it or the way Dr. Sanford described it, the description is secondary to what's really happening. You tell it like it is, because if we're getting sicker, we need to know that.
He wouldn't answer that question.
Why? It's just that simple. So you see, I tried to say, you're trying to make it about that book, and you're scrutinizing it, and even little things like that, where there was a change in the language from one version to the other. He said, oh, that's a total refutation. I'm just like, no. He's just now saying, it's only 99% or some large fraction are deleterious. And Michael Lynch will say the same thing.
Right.
So it's not like, well, if you improve your number by a few more decimal points, you're still 99% right. That's bad, So,
well, remember, Sal, when that's the best they can offer, for example, what Dr. Dan was his approach, red herrings, dodging. Sorry if that sounds mean, but it's the case. I've watched the debate enough to see that's exactly what he was doing, and kind of going on rabbit trails and making it just all about the book Genetic Entropy and ignoring the bigger picture in the data. That is an admittance of defeat. I'm sorry to say it, but you did a great job. And so I want to also point something out too, because it's directly in the literature, and it's also said by, like, I've got quotes here from Kimura himself. Paul Price, we had him on, who's a great defender of this model like yourself, Sal, and he debated Dr. Ron Garrett on genetic entropy, and using Kimura's own quotes about effectively neutral and just absolutely neutral. Paul Price asked Dr. Garrett, well, what does Kimura mean by that? Because we know that Kimura, according to him, a mutation can be deleterious and effectively neutral at the same time, right? So it still has deleterious effects. But Dr. Garrett, his answer was, and we love Dr. Garrett, he's been on here a bunch of times, but his answer was he doesn't know, which means he didn't really know what Kimura meant by that. But that's exactly what Kimura meant, was that a mutation could still be effectively neutral and yet deleterious at the same time, which I think is amazing.
Well, what's even worse is something could be beneficial.
Yeah.
Remember what Speed of Sound said. Maybe the way to save the human race is for it to get dumber and dumber.
For us to get dumber and dumber. So I guess he's just saying that because he can't admit that man's getting better. Here's a question based on what you were saying then, Sal. We've had it about 3 times, I think, and a super chat in the live chat. They're loving it. So based on what you're saying, they're asking about, so when it comes to the absolute fitness, like you're talking about, and reproductive fitness, sickle cell anemia. The evolutionists are constantly using sickle cell anemia as a so-called beneficial mutation. Is that not a prime example of exactly what you're talking about? Can you touch on that, Sal?
That's a good example. The better one, actually, I think, was the one Dr. Dan gave when he was saying, oh, beneficial mutations exist. Because it was really funny. He was trying to refute Dr. Sanford and say, Dr. Sanford said all mutations are deleterious, and he was trying to refute it by saying the elephant lost its tusk. That's a beneficial mutation.
Yeah,
I got on him and said, well, you know what, Dr. Sanford, you're quoting a 2008 version, not the 2014 version. There was an amendment to that because I think probably some people said, hey, John, that's that was you need to change your wording. And he did, to his credit.
Well,
and I think that probably got under Dr. Dan's skin. But the elephant losing its tusk, So you'll see a lot in evolutionary literature that uses the word reductive evolution. Reductive evolution. That means basically loss of function. In many cases, loss of genes, loss of organs, and in fact, it's a great paper. Reductive evolution is the dominant mode of evolution.
Yeah.
Paper by Kuhn. So the absolute fitness. Let me, if I could just finish this out, because I hear a question coming in on relative and absolute fitness.
Yeah.
Now, what we can do is we could choose one of these absolute fitnesses as a reference fitness. So I'll just pick the one with the most kids. So that's Octomom. Okay, so that's Octomom here with 4, and that's Richard Dawkins with 2. Okay, I'm just joking here. So all we have to do is divide the absolute fitness by the reference fitness, and you could see you have relative fitnesses like 1.0, 0.75, 0.5. So a lot of evolutionary literature, population genetic literature, deals with relative fitness. And that's all it is. You're just scaling it. And so you'll see this W, this symbol W, that's relative fitness. And you'll see it throughout my paper here. And when you read evolutionary literature, you'll know now what these symbols are. So you can calculate mean and variance of these numbers. And the reason I use these numbers is it's a small set of numbers, and you can pump it through these equations, and you can come out and generate more numbers, which Fisher does. So that's the idea of relative fitness. And then you also have the number of people in the population, the number of individuals in the population that have that allele. So when you pump that through there, you're able to demonstrate things in Fisher's theorem. And that's about as far as I'll go unless someone has a specific question. So there's a question on relative and absolute fitness.
Oh, sorry, I was on mute again, Sal. Yeah. If you'd like to answer that question, I think the audience would appreciate that.
If someone could help me can you help me on what the question was? I don't necessarily see it. I'm sorry.
Let me see here. So there was a bunch on, sickle cell anemia, but the relative versus absolute fitness. Maybe they just wanted clarification as to like what the major difference is, but I do think you were pretty thorough on that.
If they want to restate the question, that might be helpful. Or if someone, I don't know how feasible.
Well, there is generally.
If our donors are, I don't know how feasible it is to have the very generous patrons to actually just talk, because that's pretty much the end of my talk. So now you see how. Do you see how the definition of fitness is defined evolutionarily? It has totally decoupled from.
Oh, I don't even see.
That's it.
I don't even see how they could refute what you said, Sal. Even if I wanted to pretend to be an evolutionist, I couldn't refute it. So I can see, you know what I mean? Because sometimes I'll play devil's advocate, but I can't, because it's just that rock solid what you're saying. It's also common sense, to be honest with you.
Right.
So that's why they have to resort to, like you've pointed out, the red herrings, the rabbit trails. Kind of like when they try and point out that Kimura apparently was misrepresented by Dr. Sanford. Another rabbit trail, because the bigger picture is what is the distribution of beneficial mutations. And Kimura, they'll try and point out that Kimura said.
Oh, goodness.
They'll say, Kimura said that beneficial mutations can outweigh the damage. But then Kimura just said that in passing, didn't give any data to back it up, didn't show it. Once again, another rabbit trail. Can
I point something out? I don't use that Kimura thing. One thing, Dr. Dan totally misunderstood the paper, and I was about to just challenge him. I said, "You want to do the math with me?" Do you want to do integrations of gamma functions? We can argue this. Right. I have as much math as he does. I said, we could argue this.
Oh, I know.
I was really ready to challenge him on it. I said, you want to really argue the math of this? We'll argue it, because I don't think what you just said doesn't agree with my reading of the math. And we can argue this. The other thing is, it's all moot, because what what definition of fitness does Kimura use? He uses the definitions like this,
Right.
which is total reproductive success. And so when Dr. Dan was saying, oh, look at this, look at these experiments where fitness kind of, the deleterious ones, it starts to adjust the number of proportion. I said, the problem is, first off, the bottom line is the bottom line. At some point, it's all absolute fitness anyway.
Yeah, good point.
They want to have relative fitness because that makes the math easier. But if the population gets wiped out, that means it's he said, well, you're not accounting, some evolutionists, not Dr. Dan specifically, they said, you're not accounting for environmental effects on fitness. I said, okay, if we do, it's going to make your problem worse. And I'll tell you why. So let's say a meteor hits and just wipes out all life on Earth. What happens to the absolute fitness values? Okay. Right. So I said, I could quote Dr. Will Provine, who said, in about 2 billion years, all life will end. I said, did you put that in your fitness model?
Well, I mean,
I just like, you guys are just cherry picking so much, and even your definitions are flimsy. If you want to incorporate the environment, that's great. And I'm going to point out something that's really bad. So you see this absolute fitness table where it's 4 and 3 and 2.
Yeah.
The absolute fitness being the number of kids. So Octomom's having 4, and Richard Dawkins is only having 2, quote unquote. I mean, these just figuratively speaking. This model only works if you assume it's constant across generations. That means if you have environmental effects and the absolute fitness is changing, it could be totally, it could affect the relative fitness. All this is out of the window, just out the window. And so many of the models, like when he was using Ewan's paper, I don't know this for a fact, but I would bet he's using fitness values that are constant over time. And that's very problematic. We know that that's not true. Lewontin had a paper, and it's referenced in my paper, Lewontin's work, that density-dependent selection causes a lot of problems because the number of individuals in a population actually changes the fitness values, and you end up getting these nasty differential equations that are very difficult to solve, if not impossible to solve analytically. You might only use a computer simulation or actually just a live experiment. And so the fitness model was just out of the window because the number is no longer constant. The math is nice when you have constant numbers. Oh, by the way, that's the other thing. Fisher's theorem only works if you have constant fitness values and you're not including the environment. And Basner and Sanford paper was then starting to throw in, well, what happens if you start throwing in negative mutations? And it just started to make this really bad. And you realize this is all smoke and mirrors, and it's garbage. It's just total garbage. So, if we had a third debate with Dr. Dan, especially if it's on fitness, I'd hammer him with all this. I'd say, what are you going to do with your model now? If you include environmental effects to affect the fitness values, what we also call, and the relative fitness values, what are you going to do then? It's just going to blow your model out of the water. At best, you have total uncertainty. You have no idea what it's going to do. And I said, how's that for a theory? So you can't prove, at best, you can't prove your theory. At worst, you're wrong. And some people may see fitness expressed with S coefficient stuff. Just for those who are real nerds on population genetics, I didn't go that far because it was just too complicated. You can read it in Joe Felsenstein's book, how to add those other ideas in there, because you'll see Kimura's works often expressed with S coefficients. But again, the reason I don't use Kimura's work is it's based on this notion of fitness, which is very flawed. And so what I've recommended and where we're going, when I debated Dr. Garrett, I said, let's just go back to the engineering notion of fitness, which is very close, really the intuitive way, in how well the parts fit and interact with one another. That is so much better. And that's the way medical doctors understand it. So the So the rhetorical question came up: how can I saw on the chat, how can sickle cell anemia be defined as beneficial? The reason it can be defined as beneficial is you have evolutionary biologists defining what fitness means.
Right. Spot on. You hit the nail on the head.
That's
They
why.
want to define fitness in the way that is actually going to make these changes, these mutations that are obviously reductive, somehow beneficial to the overall theory, because they're defining it the way they want to, which is, as you said, a worthless definition.
Yeah. So maybe before we say goodbye, I don't know how feasible it is to invite some people in here. I do like talking to people. Is that hard? If it's not, we'll save it for an open mic night or something.
Yeah, let's do that, because I definitely like to keep it. I think we're going on 2 hours. I want as many people to watch this as possible, because I got to say this was awesome, Sal. The points you brought up, and when I said that even if I wanted to pretend to be an evolutionist to debunk or refute anything you're saying, I can't. It's just a rock solid case. Here's a question I would have personally then. Even if, let's just say, even if you would just give them 1 or 2 truly beneficial mutations that are just not reductive, not damaging in any way, shape, or form. If those even exist, they probably don't. But let's just say a couple do, and you just give it to them. Would that in any way counterbalance the damage that's been accumulating from generation to generation, even if they had a couple?
We're going to find out, aren't we?
I guess so.
I mean, it's really. Let me say this. This has been an ongoing question, and I've actually disagreed with creationists. I actually think we're somewhat designed to have some beneficial mutations. I really believe that. And so I would say that in the functional sense, I'm sorry, I'm trying to complexity increase. Okay, so just to be clear, because I don't like the word beneficial, neutral, and deleterious. Hopefully you could see why I try to avoid those words like the plague. I mean,
right, I agree, yeah.
There is, Mendel's accountant and the book Genetic Entropy and a lot of papers use the evolutionary definition. So even under using their definitions, they're still able to prove that evolutionary theory is compromised. But when we add kind of Behe's conception, it's just like you're turbocharging this. You're putting afterburners on the whole thing of genetic entropy.
Right.
So what I'd like to say is, I think, and I've talked to Joe DeWeese about this. I said, Joe, I don't think that we can uniformly say there's no improvement. I think there is some. We see kind of a picture of this in our combinatorial immune system. The way our immune system works is it actually does leverage random mutation to be able to
you're right.
combat antigens. So if our immune system is able to adapt, and granted these are somatic cells, I don't see why we can't. There's no reason to limit the designer, the Christian God, from designing adaptation in our germline cells as well. It just so happens that he has left a very good witness of the decay of the human genome and the fall in our genome, but that doesn't mean that there is absolutely no adaptation in our genome that is complexity increase. So I've talked to Joe about this. He said, yeah, that's probably just too strong a statement. He said, it looks like our enzymes, there's some flexibility in our proteins for change that is an improvement of either complexity or an adaptation to the environment. So I think there is some intelligence in the genome in terms of being able to learn a little bit of its environment and adapt to it. I wouldn't say it's much, but I would definitely at this point not say that there is no new novel function. I think there is some.
I would agree with you on that too. And actually, it's funny you say that, because Dr. Carter that we had on last week nearly said the same thing you did, and it's true. That's what we see, especially in the immune system, like you said, is hyper variable, right? There's a lot of variance, but it's within the design parameters that the immune system is designed that way for adaptive change. because the evolutionists will often point to, and Dr. Dan likes to do that, is point to the exception where there's more than 2 alleles, and you often find that in the immune system, from my understanding. But if that part of the genome is designed, like you said, for adaptive episodes, well, then that can be, according to our model, right? The young Earth creation model, post-flood, post-Babel mutations that would have led to new alleles. So I like that you said that, because I agree 110%.
And so what I've said, the way to model this is, okay, let's just try to say, okay, so what if you have 90% bad and 10% good? Then we could still demonstrate what will happen. And like I said, we're going to find out probably the hard way what's going to happen to us. And I just don't see that it's good, because we definitely don't see improvement in the somatic line. Granted, that's not the germ line, but the reason we age is a big contributing factor is the DNA is getting worse and worse with each replication in our somatic cell line. That's very powerful evidence that it's hard to recover what you've broken.
Do we know how many somatic cell line mutations we accumulate per cell division? Roughly?
We have a good estimate, and it was in Dr. Sanford's lecture. Now, one thing I wanted to mention, that's the other thing. So we do say that we might have some improvement in complexity, where the protein might have a mutation that really helps it do a better job.
Right.
Whatever. So I acknowledge that. The problem is when you have a gene that's broken, it's very hard to recover it. That's why you age, because once your somatic cell line starts to break, just like in a cancer cell, do the cancer cells recover all their breakage,
right,
in subsequent lines? So you actually see this in the somatic cell line. Granted, it's not the germ line, but they're still the same principles. That once you have a breakage, it's very hard to reconstitute, to rebuild what has been broken, and if you lost all the records. So that is a real problem. Oh, I wanted to say this whole thing about cherry picking. I used to, I don't know if you knew this. I used to be a professional gambler on the side, and I played blackjack until I got thrown out of all the casinos in the USA. They started circulating my picture around, saying, "This guy's, you don't want this guy in your casino. He's using his math skills to beat you. Kick him out." I once got detained at an Indian reservation casino. That was kind of scary, because thankfully they let me go. But if they decided to keep me, the tribal elders had to decide what they're going to do with me. But where am I headed with this? In the casinos, you could point to people that have left that night for a win, that they actually won. But on average, the net average is, unless you're a skilled gambler, on average, the people are going to be losers. That's how casinos are in business. So the appropriate model is not to, and I'm just repeating myself, the appropriate model is not to say that there are no increases in complexity. The appropriate model is to say that there are some increases in complexity, but there are many, many more where there's loss of complexity. When you average it out, it's just like the casino eventually, what they call the house, eventually just pounding their patrons into the ground and taking all their money. So that's the more appropriate model. A lot of older creationist literature is saying that there's no complexity increase, no information increase.
Right.
So I still see that. People say there's a no information increase argument. I'm just like, I don't want to go there. I've gotten flack from creationists for saying that that's not a great argument. I wouldn't use it. You're going to get hammered. And so I just wanted to say, just say net. There's not a net increase.
Right. Exactly. Yeah.
You're going to have a lot easier time defending it. If you say that there's none, you're going to get slammed.
I was just going to point that out, because what you're saying here, Rob Carter touched on last week in great detail as well. He's written some really good articles on it, and you both would be in complete agreement. And he said the same thing. And I would agree that it should come down to net, right? Net gain versus net loss. Because, yeah, you can have some increases in complexity, but those increases in complexity, you're still carrying along all the damage with you. You know, you can have an improvement here while the entire genome, and correct me if I'm wrong, is still degenerating in many ways.
Correct. So this is like a gambler that wins a few hands and then wins 3 hands and loses 10.
Good point. Yeah.
And just a total aside, I remember I was sitting at the blackjack table and some lady was sitting beside me and she said, yeah, I lost my entire inheritance playing blackjack. I was like, whoa. Yeah, it was $500,000. She lost $500,000.
It's a scary thing, gambling. It's a scary thing.
And I was like, I was thinking to myself, why? That's a lot. $500,000 is a lot of money.
Right.
And I'm not trying to disrespect her. I was just really trying to learn what was going on because I saw so many of these people just getting burned to the ground, and it did bother my conscience. Honestly, that's also another reason I think the Lord took me out of the casino environment. By the way, I'm going to put this in the chat. It's called Holy Rollers.
It's like how do you get rich by losing money, right?
The Holy Rollers, there's several movies by the name Holy Rollers. There's the Holy Rollers, the story Card Counting Christians. I was in the credits.
Were you really?
Not that I was in the Holy Rollers team, but there's a documentary, The Holy Rollers, a group of Christian card counting Christians. They took the casinos for $3.5 million. It was really so. But anyway, I was just trying to ask this lady, what was it like? She said, "Oh, nothing was as thrilling as throwing down a $500 bet and playing it." I was just like, "Yeah, these guys are they're just it gives them some sort of adrenaline rush to take risks." Successful gamblers actually hate risk. I mean, I hated pushing money out there. I said, I hate taking risks, but you have to do in order to win.
Right.
And I said, okay, why does this happen? They do what evolutionary biologists do. They focus only on the wins and extrapolate it. They don't focus on the losses. How many papers do we have that talk about reductive evolution versus complexity increase? So they overrepresent. And so like these addicted gamblers that just end up losing all their money, they cherry pick the data in their head. And that's evolutionary theory too. It cherry picks what little examples they have of complexity increase and try to extrapolate it. Lenski is a good example. And in many cases, that's even kind of a doubtful increase in complexity. I think Behe did say that, that was definitely that can be argued to be an increase in complexity. I don't know. It's mincing words. But there's a net reduction there.
Right, yeah.
You can't be saying, oh, look at this. Look at how we improve this bacteria. Whereas I was laughing. I said, oh, Lenski figured out how to make bacteria that won't survive in the wild.
Well, exactly. Exactly. You put them into the wild, they'll be dead on arrival. I like to look at it too, like the same way you do, in terms of total functionality or absolute functionality and fitness. Yeah, there looks like there was a increase in complexity and fitness in a very narrow sense.
Yeah.
But overall, total functionality wise, it's overall degeneration, as you pointed out. It's a net loss versus a net gain.
And one thing I'll add, whenever Dr. Dan starts to throw microbes like viruses, or bacteria or yeast as model organisms for the human deterioration, we have to call him on it.
Right.
That peer-reviewed publication I shared was the beginning of trying to demonstrate this. Actually, that was something new to all of us when we looked. I said, hey, Joe, look at all this. Look how complex this is. We were all just kind of astonished. I mean, he kind of knew it, but when we started visualizing it with diagrams, it was like, wow. So we have a good argument to say that yeast are not a good model organism, or any microbe is not a good model organism for human genetic entropy.
Right. You're right.
So all these Lenski experiments, one, not only did it not really evolve very well, it'd be a terrible model organism for human beings. So even the best of that can't be extrapolated to humans.
Well, and it's funny because even though bacteria may be the most resilient or resistant to overall genetic degeneration, Lenski's experiment has actually still demonstrated some type of genetic degeneration with all of the shrinking functional genome sizes and reduction in total functionality. Yeah, like we said, there's been some narrow increases, but overall degeneration. So I find that fascinating that even in I think one of the largest long-term experiments on evolution, we've seen degeneration.
I wanted to say that just to close out tonight, to tie this back then to the worthless definition of fitness. It's very interesting when I was tasked to read about Lenski's papers, which I really hated doing because I'm so sick of reading. Like I said, I'm a janitor. Okay,
Cleaning up the mess.
It's like, can I have a nicer job, please? Because I'm tired of just refuting evolutionists. Refute them, I have to go through their garbage. I'm just a janitor.
You've mastered it, Sal. You've mastered it.
Change. So anyway, I was reading it, and I said, Lenski kept crowing about, he had all these diagrams of increase in fitness. And so now you know what the real definition of fitness is. It's just totally vacuous. That was totally meaningless, that he was getting an increase in fitness. It says nothing of the probability that new complex genes will emerge. And before I forget, maybe at some future time, I'll actually talk about why it's very hard to create a substantially new gene.
Yes, I would love that. I would love that.
Yeah, it'd be probability. So that's we made it in about 2 hours. And I'd be happy to join an open mic sometime. It's great hanging out with you guys. So
absolutely, you're a blessing. I got to say, even though we're going on 2 hours and 10 minutes, Sal, it feels like we've been here for less than an hour. It's flown by. You've made so many good points. I'm going to say it again. Even if I wanted to pretend to be an evolutionist, I couldn't refute what you said. It's just backed up by so much empirical scientific data. We've been going for over 2 hours. We've still got 31 people in the chat. So if that's
can we close with we have our new hero here. Can I just do this one more time?
Of course.
Oh, you know what I'm going to do here.
I know what you're going to do. Professor Speed, who is, what's funny is genetic degeneration has been demonstrated within the first 10 minutes of this video because of Speed. Let me approve this. Here we go. We'll close it out with a good laugh.
Okay, this is the central point of our whole talk this evening.
It could well be the best thing for the human race to get dumber and dumber until we lose our minds entirely. I mean, that may end up being the most reproductive, successful thing, right? But so be it, that thing. It could well be the best thing for the human race to get dumber and dumber until we lose our minds entirely. I mean, that may end up being the most reproductive, successful thing. Right?
You may never live this down.
I'm sorry. Now I'm realizing the look on my face. Oh my God.
I noticed that right away, Sal. Doing your best, doing your absolute best to hold back the laugh. But you knew we were going to take advantage of that clip.
Yeah. And I was just like saying, I think when that was happening, I was like, please, Lord, let the recording just hang in there. I need to share this with you.
And I'm glad you did, Sal. I'm really glad you did, because it made this lecture that much more fun. I'm still baffled. I'm still flabbergasted that any serious scientist can deny the obvious: genetic degeneration. It's real, and it's undeniable. So, and you do a great job showing us the data and refuting the critics. This was a great lecture, Brother Sal. So I want to thank everybody in the audience, everybody's super stickers, super chats, all our generous donors. We appreciate you. You guys are the life and blood of this channel. You guys are superstars. We love it. Lena Powell says she'll rewatch. And that's the thing, Sal, when you're on, your lectures your discussions, they're so rewatchable. Every time I rewatch your lectures, Sal, I learn something new. You know, I can go back and rewatch your old lectures, and I'm going to learn something new. So just like Lena there says, very rewatchable. There's a lot of goodies in this one, a lot of gems. So definitely rewatch. I will, because sometimes when I'm focusing on the chat, focusing on our supporters, sometimes I miss things, right? So I always go back and rewatch this. So I want to thank the audience. Sal, I want to thank you. Let's set up something again soon, an open mic maybe in the next couple nights, and also a lecture if you'd like to on how difficult it is to build a gene. I would love to host that, Sal. Any final words from you, Sal?
I'd just like to give glory and honor to our Lord and Savior Jesus Christ, who made this possible. And it's in the 21st century that we're finding more evidence for the Christian faith than at any other time in history, since the time of the apostles. So I want to acknowledge our Lord and Savior in everything we do. Thank you.
Amen. Amen. Beautifully said. Well said. That's actually the perfect way to end it. So I'm going to end it with our short video here, and we're going to call it a night. God bless everybody. Thanks for joining us. Thanks for sticking it out. Even after 2.5 hours, we got 30 people. So, okay. Standing for Truth is out.
For all those who appreciate the work that we're doing here on Standing for Truth, please hit that subscribe button because we are